She was only 6 years old when she looked into his red eyes for the first time. On that cold winter night, while snow covered the streets of Montreal, a lost child encountered something that shouldn't exist, and he made a choice that would echo for nearly 2 decades, a choice that would haunt him, a choice she would never forget. Because when an alpha vampire rejects a child saying, "I don't bite children," he doesn't imagine that same child can return 18 years later, no longer as a victim, but as something far more dangerous. This is the story of Evangeline, and this is the story of how rejection can transform an innocent soul into something dark and relentless. Montreal, December 2005. The city sparkled with Christmas lights, but in the dark alleys of Quartier Latin, far from tourist eyes, there was a different reality. It was where the forgotten slept, where those with nowhere to go huddled seeking warmth. And it was there, near an abandoned church, that little Evangeline woke up alone, trembling, not understanding where her parents were. She remembered screams, breaking glass, the strong smell of something burning, and then silence. Her parents had disappeared that same afternoon, swallowed by confusion she was too young to comprehend. All she knew was that she was alone, hungry, and the night was getting darker and darker. She walked through the deserted streets, her small steps leaving on the fresh snow. Her hands were red from the cold, her lips cracked. She had a stuffed teddy bear under her arm, the only thing remaining from her previous life. When she approached a dead-end alley, she heard something, a strange sound, as if someone were drinking or eating. She approached, curious, in the way only children are, without fear of danger they don't understand. And that's when she saw him. A tall man, dressed in a long black coat, kneeling over something or someone. Dark liquid dripped from his hands. His eyes, when they turned toward her, were deep, bright red, like live embers in the darkness. For a moment, time stopped. He stared at her. She stared back. There was no fear in her eyes, only confusion and strange curiosity. He stood slowly, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand, and took a step toward her. Evangeline didn't run. She simply stood there, clutching her teddy bear against her chest. "Are you lost, little one?" he asked, his voice deep and controlled, but there was something in it, a tension, as if he were holding himself back. She nodded. "My parents, they disappeared. I'm hungry." She looked at him with those big, innocent eyes, hoping he would help her. Hoping he would be like the adults her mother always said would take care of her if something happened. But he wasn't like other adults. He was Dorian Ashcroft, the oldest alpha vampire in Montreal, a predator who had hunted for centuries, who had built an empire in the shadows, who commanded an entire clan of nocturnal creatures with an iron fist. He had power. He had wealth. He had everything except something he thought he'd lost long ago: compassion. And when he looked at that child, shivering from cold, hungry, and completely vulnerable, something inside him stirred, something he hadn't felt in decades. But it was only a flash, because soon after came the anger of feeling something, the anger of being reminded of his own lost humanity. "I don't bite children," he said, with a coldness that cut the air deeper than the icy wind. He turned his back on her and began to walk, leaving Evangeline there, standing in the snow, confused and hurt by words she didn't fully understand, but felt like a slap. "Wait," she cried out, her small voice echoing in the empty alley. "Please, I'm alone." He stopped for a second, without turning around, his shoulders tensed, and then with supernatural speed, he disappeared into the darkness as if he had never been there, leaving only footprints in the snow and the body of his last victim, which Evangeline was too young to understand what it was. She stood there for long minutes, the cold biting her skin, tears beginning to stream down her face. They weren't just tears of cold or hunger. They were tears of something deeper, of abandonment, of rejection, of that visceral feeling of not being good enough for even a monster to care. And in that moment, as the bell of the abandoned church struck midnight, something inside Evangeline broke. Not completely, not yet, but a crack formed. A crack that, with time, would transform into an abyss. She was eventually found by a social worker the next morning, half frozen, still holding her teddy bear. She was taken to an orphanage in the suburbs, a gray place, with peeling walls and the smell of disinfectant trying to hide the mold. She never spoke about the man with red eyes. No one would believe anyway. but she remembered. Every night when she closed her eyes, she saw those crimson eyes, heard that cold voice. I don't bite children. As if she were unworthy even of his attention, as if she were worth nothing. The years passed slowly at the orphanage. Evangeline grew up in an environment without love, where hugs were rare and smiles even rarer. The other children avoided her. There was something about her, they said, something strange. Her eyes were too intense, her presence too heavy for a child. She learned to be alone. She learned that trusting someone was foolish. She learned that the world was a place where you were left behind if you weren't strong enough. And she promised herself, on lonely nights under thin blankets, that one day she would be strong. One day she would make that man remember her. One day he would regret having turned his back. When she turned 12, Evangeline began to research. She spent hours in the orphanage library, reading old books about folklore, mythology, creatures of the night. The nuns thought it was just childish curiosity, a strange girl obsessed with dark stories. But it wasn't curiosity. It was obsession. She needed to understand what he was. She needed to find answers, and the more she read, the more the pieces fit together. Vampires. They were real. He was real. And he had a name. Whispers in obscure internet forums, mentions in ancient texts about creatures that ruled the night in Montreal. Dorian Ashcroft, the Alpha, the Untouchable. At 15, Evangeline ran away from the orphanage. She couldn't stand those walls anymore, that meaningless life. She lived on the streets for a while, learning to survive the hard way. She learned to steal without being caught. She learned to hide. She learned to read people, to identify danger. And most importantly, she learned about the underworld, about the places where humans and supernatural creatures coexisted in the shadows. She searched for them, for vampires, for werewolves, for witches, for anyone who could give her information, for anyone who could teach her how to become more than just a fragile and forgettable human. That's how she found Margot, an old and bitter witch who lived in a tiny apartment in Plateau Mont Royal. Margot had her own reasons for hating vampires. One of them had killed her daughter decades ago. When Evangeline appeared at her door, soaked from rain, 16 years old and eyes full of dark determination, Margot saw in her an opportunity for revenge by proxy. You want power? Margot asked, studying the girl with her cloudy eyes. You want to make an alpha vampire feel pain? Evangeline didn't hesitate. Yes, I want him to remember me. I want him to regret it. And so her training began. Margot taught her shadow magic, blood magic, ancient and forbidden spells that required sacrifice. Evangeline learned everything with frightening veracity. She practiced until her hands bled, until her mind ached, until her body passed out from exhaustion. She learned to manipulate shadows, to move undetected, to create illusions. She learned about poisons that could weaken vampires, about rituals that could bind souls, about how to transform her own pain into a weapon. And during all this time, she fed her hatred, cultivated her rage. Let the memory of that cold night and that brutal rejection consume her, because that's what kept her alive. That's what gave her purpose. 2 years passed. Evangeline was now 18. She was no longer the scared and lost child. She was something else. Her eyes, once innocent, now carried a deep darkness. Her face, beautiful in an almost supernatural way, masked something dangerous. She had learned everything Margot could teach, and more. She had gone beyond, seeking other masters, other knowledge. She had become a hybrid of purposes, part human, part magic, completely consumed by vengeance. And finally, she was ready. Ready to return. Ready to confront the man who had rejected her. Ready to make him pay. Montreal hadn't changed much. The same streets, the same dark alleys. But Evangeline had changed. When she walked through Quartier Latin that December night, exactly 18 years after that first night, she didn't tremble from cold. She wasn't afraid. She had a purpose, and she knew exactly where to find him. Dorian Ashcroft owned a nightclub in the city center, Le Sanctuaire. It was where he maintained his throne, where he ruled his clan, where he was untouchable, or so he thought. The club was luxurious, red lights, pulsing music, dancing bodies, a facade of normalcy for humans who didn't know they were dancing among predators. Evangeline entered confidently, her black dress moving like shadows around her. She could feel the eyes on her. Vampires recognized when something different entered their territory. They could sense the magic emanating from her, but none of them stopped her. Perhaps out of curiosity, perhaps because she radiated something that even predators respected: danger. She climbed the stairs leading to the VIP floor. Two security guards tried to block her, but she simply extended her hand, and they fell to their knees, throats closing from invisible magic. She didn't kill them, just left them gasping as she passed. The double door at the end of the corridor opened by itself when she approached, and there he was, Dorian Ashcroft, sitting in a red velvet armchair, a glass of something dark in his hand, surrounded by members of his clan. He raised his eyes when she entered. For a moment, there was no recognition, only curiosity, and then something stirred in his gaze, a distant memory, a ghost from the past. "You," he said slowly, putting the glass aside and standing up. His red eyes studied her intensely. "I know you." Evangeline smiled. It was a cold smile, without humor. "You should. 18 years ago, you told me you didn't bite children." Well, she took a step forward, and the shadows around her seemed to move with her, as if they were extensions of her body. "I'm not a child anymore." Recognition finally clicked on his face. His eyes widened slightly, the only emotion he allowed himself to show. "The girl, in the snow." She nodded. "The girl you left to die. The girl who wasn't even worth your attention. Yes, it's me." The tension in the room was palpable. The other vampires stood up, ready to protect their alpha. But Dorian raised his hand, signaling them to stay put. He took a step toward her, studying her with an intensity that would have made anyone step back. But Evangeline remained firm. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice low and controlled. "I want you to feel," she said simply. "I want you to feel what I felt that night. I want you to understand what it's like to be left behind, abandoned, rejected. I want you to remember me for the rest of your immortal existence." Dorian didn't speak for a long moment. He just looked at her, and there was something in his gaze, something she didn't expect. It wasn't fear, it wasn't anger, it was regret. "I remember you every day," he finally said, and his voice had a quality she never imagined hearing: vulnerability. "Since that night, you haunt my thoughts, because when I turned my back on you, it was the first time in centuries that I felt shame." Evangeline blinked, confused. This wasn't what she expected. She expected arrogance, denial, even violence, but not this, not raw honesty. "You're lying," she said, but her voice faltered. "I'm not," he replied, taking another step. "You remind me of something I tried to bury long ago: humanity. That night, when I looked into your eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen in centuries. Innocence, trust, and it terrified me, because if I had helped you, if I had felt compassion for you, it would mean I was still capable of feeling, and I didn't want to feel. Feeling hurts. Feeling is weakness, so I ran. I ran from you, and I've hated myself for it ever since." His words hit her like physical blows. She had built her entire life around the idea that he was a monster without remorse, that he was cruel for cruelty's sake, that he needed to be punished. But now he was saying she had haunted him too? That he regretted it? "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, you can't. You can't just say that and expect it to change anything. I lost everything because of you. I became this." She gestured to herself, to the shadows dancing around her. "Because of you. You can't apologize and make it all disappear." "I know," Dorian said softly, "and I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it, but I'm telling you the truth. Because you deserve that, at least. You deserved help that night. You deserved protection, and I failed you. And that failure, it changed me more than you imagine." He stopped right in front of her now, so close she could see the small cracks in the mask of coldness he always wore. "I looked for you," he continued, "in the following days, weeks, months. I wanted to find you, to make sure you were okay. But you had disappeared into the system, and the more time passed, the more I convinced myself it was better that way, that I didn't deserve to know, that my guilt was my punishment." Evangeline felt tears burning her eyes, but she forced them down. She wouldn't cry, not in front of him. "If you really cared," she said, her voice trembling with anger, "you would have found me. You would have done something. But you didn't. And now you want me to believe you suffered, that you felt something. You're a vampire. You're immortal. You have power. And I was just a scared child you discarded like trash." "You're right," he said, and there was genuine pain in his voice. You're absolutely right. There's no excuse for what I did, no justification. And if you came here for revenge, I won't fight. If you want to make me suffer, I'll let you. Because maybe that's what we both need. You need justice, and I need punishment. He knelt in front of her, something that shocked everyone in the room. An alpha vampire, offering his throat, offering his life. Do what you need to do, he said calmly. Evangeline looked at him, her mind a storm of emotions. This was the opportunity she had worked for, that she had suffered for, that she had transformed herself into something dark for. She could kill him now. She could make him suffer. She could take everything from him as he had taken everything from her. Her hand rose, shadows coiling around her fingers, ready to strike. She saw something. In his eyes. Those same red eyes that had haunted her for 18 years. But now, looking more closely, she saw something more. She saw the same emptiness she felt, the same loneliness, the same pain of being something the world feared and rejected. He was a monster, but she had become one too. Get up, she finally said, her voice hoarse. He looked at her, surprised, but obeyed. I'm not going to kill you, she continued, and the shadows around her began to dissipate. Because that would be too easy, for both of us. You want punishment? Then live with it. Live knowing you transformed me into what I am. Live knowing you created another monster in the world. That's your punishment. That's my revenge. She turned to leave, but he spoke again. Evangeline. She stopped, but didn't turn. How did he know her name? I discovered your name, he said, as if reading her thoughts. Over the last 18 years, I learned everything about you. I followed your life from afar. The orphanage, your escape, your training with Margot, everything. Not because I wanted to control you, but because I needed to know you were alive, that you were okay, even though I didn't deserve to know. Evangeline finally turned, tears now flowing freely down her face. You followed me, yes? He admitted, like a coward, watching from afar, never having the courage to approach, because I knew I didn't deserve to be in your life. You're right, she said bitterly. You don't deserve it. She began walking toward the door again, but something made her stop, a question she needed to ask. Why did you really reject me that night? Don't give me that story about being afraid to feel. Give me the truth. Dorian was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. Because you reminded me of my daughter. She was your age when she died, 300 years ago. And when I looked at you, I saw her face, and I couldn't bear it. I couldn't bear being reminded of what I lost, of what I failed to protect. So I ran. From you, from the pain, from everything. Evangeline slowly turned, looking at him with new eyes. And suddenly, everything made sense. The rejection, the coldness. It wasn't about her being unworthy, as pregnant. It was about him being unable to face his own trauma, his own grief. I spent 18 years hating you, she said softly. 18 years transforming myself into a weapon to destroy you, and now I don't know what to feel. Hate me, Dorian said. I deserve it. But please, don't hate yourself. You're not a monster, Evangeline. You're a survivor, and you're stronger than I'll ever be. I don't feel strong, she admitted, her voice breaking. I feel empty, like I spent so much time feeding this anger that now I don't know who I am without it. Dorian took a hesitant step toward her. Then let me help you find out. Let me try to correct the mistake I made. Not because I deserve it, but because you deserve to have someone who cares, even if it's a monster like me. She looked at him for a long moment, and then, to her own surprise, she began to laugh. It was a laugh without humor, broken, but still a laugh. This is ridiculous, she said. Absolutely ridiculous. I came here to destroy you, and now you're offering what? Redemption? A second chance. I'm offering a choice, he said. Something you didn't have that night. You can leave. Continue your path. Never see me again. Or, he hesitated, or you can stay, not as my victim, not as my enemy, but as someone who deserves to have answers, to have understanding, to have perhaps a place where you can discover who you are beyond the pain. Evangeline knew she should refuse, knew she should leave and never look back. But a part of her, a small, broken part that was still that 6-year-old child looking for someone who cared, wanted to stay, wanted to understand, wanted perhaps to find some kind of peace. If I stay, she finally said, it's not because I forgive you, and it's not because I believe you can fix this. It's Because I'm tired. Tired of being alone. Tired of carrying so much hatred. Dorian nodded, and there was genuine relief on his face. That's more than I deserve. And so, in a way neither of them had anticipated, something changed that night. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. Perhaps it never would be. But it was a beginning. A first hesitant step towards something that could, eventually, look like healing. In the days that followed, Evangeline remained in Montreal. Dorian offered her an apartment in one of his buildings, not out of charity, he made clear, but because she deserved to have a safe space. They began to talk, strange and uncomfortable conversations at first. He told her about his life, about how he had been turned into a vampire against his will centuries ago, about his daughter, who died in his arms while he was too weak to save her, about how he had spent centuries closing himself off, becoming cold because it was easier than feeling the pain. And Evangeline slowly began to share her own stories, about the orphanage, about the nights when she cried alone, about how she felt invisible, about how his rejection had been the last straw that made her believe she didn't deserve love or care. Each conversation was like pulling a glass shard from an old wound. It hurt, but it also relieved. They didn't become friends immediately. There was too much pain, too much resentment, but there was also a growing understanding, a comprehension that they were both victims of their own tragedies, that they had both transformed into things they didn't want to be out of fear of feeling. Months passed. Evangeline began to explore who she was beyond revenge. She discovered she liked art, music, small moments of beauty she had denied herself while consumed by hatred. Dorian, in turn, began to allow himself to feel again. He began to laugh, something his clan hadn't seen him do in decades. He began to care, not just about Evangeline, but about the people around him. He began to try to be better, not perfect, but better. And then, on a spring night, almost a year after that initial confrontation, they were sitting on the roof of Evangeline's building, looking at the stars. "I still hate you sometimes," she said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. Dorian laughed softly. "I know, and that's okay. But also," she hesitated, "I'm also grateful, in a strange way, because if you hadn't rejected me that night, if you had helped me, I never would have become who I am. I never would have discovered my strength. And yes, that strength was born from pain, but it's still mine, and it defines me." "You're extraordinary," Dorian said, looking at her with something that seemed like admiration. "You took the worst night of your life and transformed it into power. You could have killed me, could have destroyed everything, but you chose something harder. You chose to understand. You chose to try to heal. That's true strength." Evangeline smiled, a genuine smile, for the first time in a long time. "I don't know if I chose or if I was just too tired to keep hating. Sometimes," he said, "tiredness is the most honest form of wisdom." They sat in silence for a while longer, and Evangeline realized something. The crack that had formed in her 18 years ago, it was still there. It probably always would be. But it was no longer an abyss. It was just a scar, a mark of something that happened, something painful, but also something she had survived. And survival, she was learning, was its own form of victory. "I don't forgive you," she finally said. "Maybe I never will completely." "I know," he replied, "and I don't expect you to." "But," she looked at him, "but I think I'm learning to let go. Not for you, for me, because carrying this is too heavy, and I'm tired of being heavy." Dorian said nothing. He just nodded, and there were tears, tears of blood as vampires cry, running down his face. They were tears of relief, of gratitude, of something that remotely resembled redemption. And then something unexpected happened. Evangeline reached out and took his hand. It was a simple gesture, but it meant everything. It meant she was choosing connection instead of isolation. She was choosing to try instead of giving up. And Dorian, this ancient vampire who had spent centuries closing himself off, squeezed her hand back. And in that moment, on a rooftop in Montreal, under the stars, two broken beings found something neither of them expected. It wasn't complete forgiveness. It wasn't perfect happiness. But it was hope. It was the promise that maybe, just maybe, broken people could find their way back to the light. Together. The following years weren't easy. There were relapses. Moments when Evangeline looked at Dorian and saw again the man who had rejected her. moments when the anger returned, sharp and cutting. And Dorian never tried to erase that, never tried to rush her healing. He simply stayed by her side, consistently, letting her feel what she needed to feel, proving, day after day, that he wouldn't leave again. Evangeline also discovered purpose. She used her magic and knowledge to help others like her, the lost, the rejected, the forgotten. She created a sanctuary for homeless youth, a place where they could find safety and understanding. And in small and large ways, she transformed her pain into something that could help others avoid the same darkness. Dorian supported this with resources and protection. Together, they built something meaningful, something that honored both their pain, transforming it into something that could heal. And one night, 5 years after that initial confrontation, Evangeline realized something surprising. She was happy. Not perfectly, not without complications, but genuinely, deeply happy. She had purpose, she had connections, she had someone who, despite everything, cared deeply about her. And she cared about him too, in a complicated way, marked by history, but real. "You know," she said to Dorian that night as they worked together at the sanctuary, "if someone had told me, 18 years ago, that I would be here now, doing this with you, I would have thought it impossible." "The impossible," Dorian said with a small smile, "is just the difficult we haven't tried yet." She laughed. "When did you become so wise?" "When I learned from someone extraordinarily resilient that revenge isn't the only answer to pain, and that sometimes the strongest people are those who choose to heal instead of destroy." Evangeline felt tears in her eyes, but these were different. They weren't tears of pain or anger. They were tears of something she thought she'd lost forever that cold night when she was 6. Hope. And then, in a moment of absolute clarity, she understood. Her story was never about revenge. It was never about making Dorian pay. It was about discovering that, even when the world rejects you, even when monsters turn their backs, you can still choose who you become. You can still choose to transform your pain into purpose. You can still choose to rise, and that choice was the greatest power of all. Years later, when people asked Evangeline about her story, she said something simple but profound. "I met a monster when I was 6. He rejected me. I spent 18 years hating him, and then I discovered he was as broken as I was. And together, we found a way to transform our scars into something beautiful. It wasn't easy, it wasn't fast, but it was worth it. Because in the end, the greatest revenge isn't destroying who hurt us, it's refusing to let that pain destroy us." And as for Dorian, he finally found something he'd lost centuries ago. Not exactly redemption. He knew some mistakes were too big to be completely forgiven, but he found purpose. He found a reason to be better. And he found someone who saw him completely, his monsters, his failures, his pain, and still chose to stay. Not out of obligation, not out of fear, but because, despite everything, there was something between them worth saving. And so, in this story of rejection and revenge that transformed into something completely different, there's a lesson. A lesson that echoes through the centuries, through all human and supernatural pain. It's this: sometimes the people who hurt us are also hurting. And while that doesn't excuse what they did, understanding can free both. Revenge may seem sweet, may seem fair, but in the end, it's just more pain added to the world. While choosing to understand, choosing to heal, choosing to transform trauma into something that helps others, that's real magic. That's true power. That's what changes the world, one soul at a time. Evangeline, that child rejected in the snow, grew to be one of the strongest people Montreal had ever seen. Not because she destroyed her enemy, but because she chose something much harder. She chose to live. She chose to heal. She chose to love, even when loving seemed impossible. And Dorian, the alpha vampire who had closed himself off for centuries, finally found what he was looking for. Not power, not immortality, but connection, purpose, a reason to wake up every night and try to be something better than he was the day before. Their story didn't have a perfect happy ending, because life and death and everything between them doesn't work that way. But it had something better. It had growth, it had transformation. It had two broken beings choosing day after day to build something beautiful from the ruins of their pain. And perhaps, in the end, that's the most any of us can hope for. Not perfection, not the absence of pain, but the courage to keep trying, even when everything seems lost. The courage to choose hope when despair seems easier. The courage to believe that broken people can eventually find their way back to the light. So when you think of Evangeline and Dorian, don't think of them as a story about vampires and revenge. Think of them as a story about what we all face. The choice between letting our past define us or using it as stepping stones to something greater. The choice between feeding our hatred or transforming it into fuel for change. The choice between destroying what hurt us or understanding that sometimes healing together is more powerful than hurting alone. And if this story touched something in you, if you saw a piece of yourself in a rejected child or in a remorseful monster, then maybe you too can choose. Choose to forgive, not because the person deserves it, but because you deserve peace. Choose to grow from pain instead of shrinking within it. Choose to believe that no matter how broken you are, no matter how dark your night has been, you can still find light. You can still find purpose. You can still find, in the end, something that looks like home. Because that's the final truth. We all have our cold nights in the snow. We all have our moments of rejection. We all have our scars. But those scars don't have to destroy us. They can, if we let them, make us stronger, wiser, more compassionate. And when we find other scarred souls, when we recognize our own pain reflected in someone's eyes, we can make a choice. We can add more pain to the world, or we can try, together, to heal. And that choice is where true magic lives. Not in spells or supernatural powers, but in the simple and profound courage to choose love over hate, light over darkness, hope over despair. And if you take just one thing from this story, let it be this. You are stronger than your worst night. You are bigger than your greatest pain. And no matter who turned their back on you, no matter who said you weren't enough, they were wrong. You always were enough. You always were worthy. And you always have the power to choose who you become, regardless of who tried to diminish you. This is Evangeline's story. This is Dorian's story. But in the end, maybe it's all of our story, seeking connection, seeking meaning, seeking a place where our scars can finally begin to heal. And maybe, just maybe, if you believe that, if you believe that healing is possible even after the deepest pain, then you too can find your way back home. Wherever home means to you, whoever is waiting there, you can find your way. So what do you think? Do you believe in second chances? Do you believe that even monsters can learn to feel again? Do you believe that scars can transform into wisdom? If this story spoke to you, if it touched something deep in your heart, then you already know the answer. Because the truth is, we're all just looking for someone who sees our scars and doesn't run away. For someone who understands that being broken doesn't mean being beyond repair. For someone who chooses to stay, even when leaving would be easier. And if you find that person, or if you are that person for someone, then you know the true magic of this world, the magic of human connection, of compassion, of choosing to be light in someone else's darkness. That's the story, that's the lesson, that's the invitation. Now, the choice is yours. And if you take just one thing from this story, let it be this. You are stronger than your worst night. You are bigger than your greatest pain. And no matter who turned their back on you, no matter who said you weren't enough, they were wrong. You always were enough. You always were worthy. And you always have the power to choose who you become, regardless of who tried to diminish you. This is Evangeline's story. This is Dorian's story. But in the end, maybe it's all of our story. Seeking connection, seeking meaning, seeking a place where our scars can finally begin to heal. And maybe, just maybe, if you believe that healing is possible even after the deepest pain, then you too can find your way back home. Wherever home means to you, whoever is waiting there, you can find your way. So what do you think? Do you believe in second chances? Do you believe that even monsters can learn to feel again? Do you believe that scars can transform into wisdom? If this story spoke to you, if it touched something deep in your heart, then you already know the answer. Because the truth is, we're all just looking for someone who sees our scars and doesn't run away. For someone who understands that being broken doesn't mean being beyond repair. For someone who chooses to stay, even when leaving would be easier. And if you find that person, or if you are that person for someone, then you know the true magic of this world, the magic of human connection, of compassion, of choosing to be light in someone else's darkness. That's the story. That's the lesson. That's the invitation. Now the choice is yours.